Alright, so hey guys, so welcome to another Warframe video, and Hotfix 24.2.10 has arrived and it changed a couple of things here and there. Most of it is sort of general hotfixy kind of stuff, though they did increase the accuracy on the Brak, the Comag and the Twin Comag. But there is one thing that stands out in this hotfix, and it has to do with Magnum Force. Now, Magnum Force, for those of you that have never used it or even seen it, for which I would not blame you, is a heavy caliber-esque corrupted mod for secondary weapons that gives you some extra damage at the cost of accuracy. The problem with Magnum Force is that it wasn't really worth the mod slot for many years on the vast majority of weapons, and you would only ever use it if you actually wanted the negative accuracy to increase the coverage of your secondary weapon. Because the original iteration of this mod only provided 66% bonus damage at the cost of 33% accuracy. And this was, as I've said already, just straight up not worth it even back in the day, and it was made even more obsolete with the addition of Augur Pact, which provides more damage with no downside, and it has a set bonus. So you would only ever use it if you had nothing else to put on the weapon and the negative accuracy wasn't a big deal. But those days are no more, because lo and behold, Magnum Force has been buffed and it's basically heavy caliber for secondary weapons now. And it provides 165% bonus damage at the cost of 55% accuracy at maximum rank. And while this is really cool because hey, Magnum Force is finally worth the mod slot, blimey, some people I think are getting a little bit too excited for this buff. First of all, minus 55% accuracy is quite severe, especially on certain types of weapons. And instead of just talking about how important accuracy is and blah blah blah, I'm just going to show you a couple of examples so you can see how much of an impact this actually has. So, example number one, we have semi-automatic pistols in the form of the Aguasto Prime. So here is the spread without Magnum Force. You can see that they are very accurate and the shots are grouped tightly together with the exception of the first shot, which will kick the weapon up where the weapon will stay for the rest of the magazine. And here's the spread with Magnum Force. You can see that it is significantly worse. The shots are flying all over the place, and it's a great example of why you might not want to use Magnum Force on every secondary weapon you own, because if you put Magnum Force on something like the Aguasto Prime, you can say goodbye to reliable headshots. For example number 2, we're gonna go over to the Aguasto Prime for fully automatic pistol. So here is the accuracy without Magnum Force, and here is the accuracy or spread with Magnum Force. The spread is actually fairly similar. It's not as tight as it was without Magnum Force, but it's not all over the place either. So it's a great example of a weapon where if you have the mod space and it makes sense to put Magnum Force on, you might want to do it. And for our final example, we're gonna pick up the Brak and we're gonna see what the negative accuracy does to a shotgun. So here's the spread without Magnum Force. You can see it's actually fairly tight, but as soon as we put on Magnum Force, you can see that the pellets are flying all over the place. This one is actually kind of interesting because for the Brak, and it's not the only weapon, there are more of them, Magnum Force at first glance should outperform Lethal Torrent. You're gonna lose some accuracy, but it's a shotgun, you're gonna be close to the enemy, so it doesn't matter. The fire rate, not that big of a deal either. You have 5 rounds in the magazine and you can fire 5 rounds every second, even without Lethal Torrent. And Brak is not one of those shotguns that can reach 100% status chance before multi-shot, so losing 7.1% status chance is not a big deal. So you might look at this and go, huh, I'm just getting more damage. But the reality is quite different. Because as I've said already, unless you're shoving the shotgun down the enemy's throat and then pulling the trigger, you're gonna start losing pellets because they will fly to the side of the enemy or above the enemy if you aim close to their heads, and that's a big issue, especially since you don't have as many pellets because you took out Lethal Torrent. So it should be better on paper, but in reality it takes about the same amount of shots if you play with the weapon normally and you don't shove it down the enemy's throat. And if you're doing that, shoving the weapon down the enemy's throat, you might as well use a melee weapon. Now, you might be asking, well, why did you choose a Lethal Torrent? Why didn't you replace another mod? And that unfortunately would be a video in and of itself, but the simplified version of that is you can't put too many eggs into one basket. You have to balance out how much raw damage scaling you have from things like Hornet Strike and Serration. Then you have to add some extra damage on top of that with elemental mods, which are very strong, because if your weapon is doing 10,000 damage and you add one elemental mod, it's now doing 19,000 damage. Then you want to get in some multi-shot because that is a massive multiplier as well, and if the weapon can crit, you have to squeeze that in as well, but you can't overdo it on any of these things because if you do, your damage is actually going to suffer. It's something you can very easily test yourself actually. Just pick up a crit weapon and put on all the crit mods, or pick up any weapon and put on 4 90% elementals and 4 duostat mods, and you will see that the damage is not as good as if you use a more balanced build. It's the reason why I don't use bladed rounds all that often. It just puts too many eggs into the crit basket and usually doesn't leave me enough for the elemental basket. And the elemental basket is very important because your elemental damage gets scaled by everything else. Right? Generic damage scaling scales elemental damage. Crit scales elemental damage. Multi-shot scales elemental damage. So you basically want to get as much elemental damage as possible and then multiply it by as many things as you can. But it has to be balanced, because if you put in too much elemental damage, you can't fit in as many multipliers and vice versa. Though you have to bear in mind that this is on a weapon by weapon basis. If the weapon, for example, can reliably red crit, bladed rounds might be really good. Now, the reason I just explained all of that, blimey, is because I see a lot of people making these kinds of mistakes in the comments, suggesting that you just put all your eggs into one of these baskets and it's gonna be amazing, but it's not. And I think it's very important to have at least a basic understanding of how builds are put together and how they work and how to balance them, rather than just, parroting a build and then being really confused because it doesn't work on another weapon. But at the same time, I think it's also important to still look around and try out new things, because well, the way meta happens is because someone tried something else and it worked. But anyway, back to Magnum Force. So are there any weapons that I would personally want to use it on? Yes, and you've been watching one of them for a while now. The Staticor. It's fantastic for the Staticor, especially if you're running a similar build to mine, which is sort of a heavy-duty crowd control / armor stripping setup that also does a nice chunk of damage. Because it benefits from both the extra damage, which is always nice, but also the negative accuracy, which will spread your shots out quite a bit and make it cover a much larger area with each pull of the trigger. And it does the exact same thing for the Pox. It adds a bunch of damage, but it also makes it cover a much larger area thanks to the negative accuracy. And I think that's enough rambling for today, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video and it was helpful at least a little bit, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.
Sons and daughters, by the heart of who we are, making peace to build a future, strong, united, working till we fall.